So what was this Tory or conservative Euroscepticism grounded in? Key criticisms: anxiety about migration numbers and welfare entitlements. Immigration from Europe, not those in need of aid, but those coming in to take jobs, was seen as a difficult issue. They were thought to push wages down and make use of scarce housing. Also, these immigrants would be entitled to welfare, and this was difficult to accept for many. And this was part of the renegotiation that David Cameron was talking about. And then there was this right-wing criticism, this dismay with EU regulation, too much regulation, labor market rights, this too much bureaucracy and this red tape constraining business. So in the UK, it's very much about free trade, whereas in Norway, we're a little bit different. We would worry, for example, about the dismantling of the welfare state. For example, protection of public service areas such as postal or transport services. In the EU, they say you must provide competition, and this is a dominant vein of EU criticism in Norway. So in the UK, they think there's too much regulation of free trade and competition. So we see this difference. For example, in the UK, this criticism is more conservative right-wing, whereas in Scandinavia, it's more socially democratic. So this criticism of EU. And then you have this democratic deficit. The UK saying that there is not enough, or England saying that there is not enough sovereignty in Parliament. They're saying decisions shouldn't be made in Europe, they should be made in England. Also this EU waste of resources and the dangerous influence of the Eurozone. This discrimination of the city of London, the financial city of London in particular. It's important to note that before Brexit, there were only 4 months of campaigning, and then there was the referendum. In our last referendum in Norway, we were given much, much more time. So in other words, in England or in the UK, there was an under-informed public, a lot of mud throwing or mudslinging, and 30-odd million people who felt they were not informed. And this is an example of how not to address complex situations in a modern society. The result, a divided Britain. 51.9%, 17.4 million people leave versus 48.1% or 16.1 million people remain. And the electoral turnout was 72.2% citizens voted. But behind these numbers, we see deep cleavages along social and geographical lines. Notice this disparity between the majority leave and the majority remain. You see Scotland, all remain. You see both remain and leave in Northern Ireland, but mostly remain. And then you see this area of London, parts of southern England, voting to remain. Notice in red here, the backyard of post-industrial Britain, leave. Wages were down, the political elite has abandoned us, a protest vote against all that is wrong in society, and a strong vote, and also a decisive vote, pushing the balance in favor of leave. Also, notice Northern Ireland, a little bit more complex there, with the Democratic Unionist Protestants, a sort of London loyalism, and the opposite with Republicans to a European integration, safe haven, that of peace. Things will be difficult between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, as we see now with this discussion of a hard border, of a backstop. Notice the social split in education, age, and ethnicity. Age, elderly, the elderly more Eurosceptic, the lower paid, the lower educated, They were all on the Leave side, or many on the Leave side. The stereotype could point to countryside areas. Also ethnicity, more often white British than not. And party affiliation, Conservatives and almost all of UKIP. So here you see this stereotypical Leave voter: ethnicity, education, age, and party affiliation. And here you see the stereotypical Remain voter: living in an urban area or Scotland, mixed ethnicity, high education, young age, party affiliation, Labour, Lib Dems, Greens, or Scottish Nationalist Party. So why a majority for Leave? This was the classic account of British Euroscepticism, which was stronger than economic pragmatism, this of trade. It was a mixed bag of public dismay, this end of the age of deference, this rise of populism, no longer wanting to listen to the political elite. It was bad political craftsmanship by David Cameron. And UKIP were remarkably effective in rallying people, these backyard people of post-industrial England. UKIP had done well in the former election, and people continued to listen to their line of argument after the election. The rest of the public would not take them seriously, but they won. They were the voice to disgruntlement, people who were angry about jobs and industry gone, this voice of nostalgia. And the role of the right-wing media was also very important in Brexit, and the brevity, the shortness of the campaign. It was a quick and dirty fight. And as The Economist said, it was no longer a question of traditional right or left, but this nationalism versus globalism, this closed versus this open market, and this feeling of nostalgia. And quite clearly, both Northern Ireland, but in particular Scotland, finds this very difficult. In their previous referendum, they had decided to remain in the UK in order to remain in the EU. And then in the next referendum in the UK, you find the Leave side winning. So this is a very difficult issue for Scotland. And then you have these great challenges that the UK is still facing and will probably face for many years to come. Yes, through Article 50 they were allowed to leave the EU with this deadline of March 29, 2019, but they have yet to come to an agreement about this backstop. Northern Ireland, customs union, no customs union, this talk of trade, let alone this replacing with new trade agreements, or this ability to negotiate new trade agreements, and whether it's going to be a hard or a soft version. There is no agreement as of yet, and the EU do not want to continue in this discussion because they said we are finished with negotiation. So in summary, you have this overarching dilemma with British Euroscepticism being grounded in a desire to maximize trade, but to minimize unwanted migration, unwanted EU regulation, and budget contributions. In general, avoid Europe, but make an economic success of it. So finally, here we see these classic tenets in 21st century clothing. Are we going full circle back to an empire of free trade? Is it even possible? Will Britain be a great power in its own right? Is it even possible? And are we returning to this paradigm of undisputed sovereignty of Parliament? We'll just have to pay attention to what happens and hope we become wiser in this as well. I hope this has helped you understand Brexit a little bit better.